Thanks everyone and welcome to the channel. Let me say again, thanks for your support and encouragement. I want to look at making inclusion real in the online learning space, and that's our topic for this time. And I must say that we have heard the calls about inclusion. Many presenters and advocates for inclusion will say we must ensure that the learners are considered and we must plan accordingly. Others will say that we must ensure that you think about all the students in that online learning space. But how do you do that? That's the question. However, inclusion extends beyond talk. Inclusion is really a verb and requires action. Inclusion does not reside on a piece of paper, but actually, again, in action. And the first action must start with you, the educator. Yes, it begins with us reflecting on our biases, prejudices, ideological assumptions, and other issues. It starts by us taking time to examine our own privileges. In summary, online inclusion begins when the educator reflects on how their actions will include or exclude or marginalize the learner. At this point, I'll turn it over to my co-presenter, Pat. She will present and then I will give a summary of her conversation and we'll summarize it at that point.
Thanks, Rohan. Let me start off by using a scenario to establish the diverse group of students that can be in an online class. Imagine you are called to teach a diverse class. This online class has one student who has a hearing difficulty, another student who is blind, one student who recently broke her leg and is currently hospitalized, and 5 students are being supported by an educational provision. This class is also diverse based on the religious beliefs of students. You may consider this scenario unreal. However, some educators actually have many of these students in their online classes. The issue is how to remove potential barriers to ensure students are included. Let's also remember that the inclusion of our students is a decisive dimension of belonging. However, a start is understanding and knowing the students in your class. Therefore, before you teach, you must review the students' profiles. A student profile will outline their performance over time and provide information on students' required support. The profile is a window into your students' world. Knowing your students will prepare you to build a relationship with your online students and set the foundation needed for them to feel valued within the online class community. As you build relationships with your students, you must advocate that they show respect for each other. To ensure this occurs, the online teacher must set guidelines for online interaction. The teacher should also clarify that everyone needing assistance will get the required help. Now let's examine one student in our scenario. The student is presently hospitalized because of a broken leg. How could the teacher provide support? The teacher could give the student work in advance to allow the student to prepare for their online class or be creative to get the student engaged. Recently, I saw a news report that showed a student who was hospitalized getting all the support to be included in the online class. It was good seeing the student engaging with other students. Another key factor I want to explore is the insider's voice, which is key to the inclusion process. Based on the limited time educators have today, at times, students' voices are not listened to. We cannot be effective educators if we have not listened to voices from those we are trying to include. Another important factor for making inclusion real in online learning is effective intervention practice. In the scenario mentioned earlier, all students with or without special needs should be monitored. Of course, those with a special learning need will be most important during the monitoring process. In the monitoring process, the online educator will use ongoing online observations to assess what interventions will be necessary to ensure total access to all students to the online content and platform. At times, adjustments to materials and tasks will be essential. However, the online teacher will need to justify the adjustments to online content and materials, reflect on what will be achieved, and evaluate if there will be a need for long-term adjustments. For example, in our scenario outlined above, the student who is blind would need to be provided with support materials to ensure accessibility, which would be classified as long-term adaptation. By addressing these issues I have just mentioned, the online teacher will be creating suitable learning opportunities and responding to the needs of their online learners. The online inclusive class caters for students to share their perspectives with each other. Today's online class is diverse based on race, gender, culture, religion, social economic status, and abilities. Consequently, the online teacher's choice of content must always reflect the diverse online group. Therefore, an inclusive class teacher will consistently reflect on decisions and actions to reduce biased stereotypes. For an inclusive online class, educators must align themselves with inclusive pedagogy, which seeks to engage students regardless of their background and create the climate for social justice and inclusion within students' daily lives. The inclusive online teacher will structure learning by planning and consider technical issues that limit students' participation. In addition, inclusive teachers create flexibility to ensure students can work at their own pace and also have the time to revisit materials. Let me also say that the inclusive teacher understands the importance of giving feedback within the online space. This feedback is accessible and clearly understood by students or their caregivers. The online educator should remember that not all students were given the same start. Some students are ahead academically. Subsequently, the online teacher must scaffold learning to ensure that students who are behind in their academic performance will make academic gains. The reality is good teaching is inclusive in nature. Furthermore, the online teacher must consider the diverse ways students learn and design students' assessments accordingly. Before I hand it over back to Rohan, I would like us to consider the concept of accessibility. Whatever materials or mode of communication used must be accessible to all learners. At times, videos will need to be transcribed, live sessions will need to be recorded for access later. Remember, inclusion is also about ensuring that barriers are removed to give learners access. Let me turn it over back to Rohan for his final words.
Thanks, Pat. Let me see that the online class will be inclusive when students know that their teacher cares about them and is willing to work with them for them to maximize their full potential, and is willing to go the extra mile to ensure that their emotional needs are addressed, and is there to encourage them, to motivate them. All these things are part of the inclusive process. Making inclusion real requires reflection on action, monitoring, advocacy, and of course, a love for the online learner. Too often, educators seem to suggest that inclusion can be found on a rubric. Inclusion relies on effort and commitment. Inclusion requires consistent and sustained effort. Inclusion is a work in practice. And I want to see inclusion requires a change in action for you to consistently engage. I have posted in the description section of this video some resources for you to reflect on. Please do so. Make sure, and thanks, and that's all for now, and remember to subscribe to this channel. As always, I'm out.